At the time, it was more just like, dude, it'd be fucking awesome to work with my best friends and do a thing and bring it to the world and not report to anybody. This could be super fun.
Welcome to Eating Glass. It's a podcast where in each episode, we ask startup founders the questions no one else will. Our goal? To reveal what it's actually like to start, scale, and exit a company. I'm Joe Lemay, and I bootstrapped my reusable notebook company, Rocketbook, to a $50 million exit.
And I am Nitze, founder and CEO at IQBAR, a nutrition company I took from 0 to 40 plus million in annual revenue. For better or worse, we are your hosts. Eating Glass is sponsored by IQBAR, which is my company, so be nice to it. What do we do here? We make IQBAR plant protein bars, IQ Mix hydration mixes, and IQ Joe instant mushroom coffees, all of which are special because they are the only thing in their category that centers on nutrients good for your body, protein, electrolytes, things like that, as well as things that are good for your brain, so magnesium or lion's mane to name a few. They are all delicious. Most functional foods and drinks taste like crap. Ours taste good, and taste matters. That is despite them being super low in sugar and super clean label. There's no weird stuff on our labels. And by the way, they're affordable. Functional stuff is usually price gougy, and we are not. I will not be offering a discount code. I will instead ask you a favor. Go to Amazon.com, search for IQBAR, IQ Mix, IQ Joe, or some combination of the three. Find a non-sponsored listing, click on it, buy it, wait for it to arrive, and leave a review. And that is the only favor I will ever ask you. Thank you very much.
All right, Preston Rutherford, welcome to the show. Welcome to Eating Glass. Super psyched to have you here, man.
Thank you, guys. Will, Joe, thank you. Pumped to be here. This will be fun.
You and three friends started Chubbies, which is today this epic, well-known brand, which really pioneered the movement of shorter shorts for men. And this is back in 2011, where I think a lot of people were still wearing cargo shorts, to then getting into a 9-figure exit and a 10-figure IPO. What's your genesis? Are you a born entrepreneur?
I think it really started for me in college because I knew nothing about startups or whatever, and took a class on high-tech entrepreneurship. And I was like, holy shit, this is awesome. This is for me. I couldn't get a job coming out of Stanford in 2008 because it was not a great time. Started to see some really cool stuff that I just never imagined seeing, like being in the incubator space of a VC called Kleiner Perkins on Sand Hill Road, doing all this crazy stuff that I just had no context on, coming from Tucson, Arizona, with, pretty much no access to entrepreneurship.
One of the interesting things about Chubbies is there are 4 co-founders, right? Like, how was that dynamic like at the outset, and how did that evolve over time?
Each additional co-founder you add just adds massive risk, but then I also think upside. We were just so blessed, lucky, whatever, that we experienced most of the upside and less of the downside that could happen. Again, it was like so organic. There was such excitement about this idea. We were 25 at the time. We didn't have mortgages or marriages or kids. At the time, it was more just, dude, it'd be fucking awesome to work with my best friends and do a thing and bring it to the world and not report to anybody. This could be super fun.
Like, step one is replace your existing job with a more fun job, replace your coworkers with your friends, and like already you're winning at that point.
Totally. So we didn't quit our jobs. So it was less of a immediate financial decision because we did this for a long time, nights and weekends. So it was like the calculus or the decision-making was more like, do I want to pull from Netflix time and put time into this? And not that we're just a bunch of idiots. Like, all of us, like, we were relatively thoughtful, considered folks who were relatively deliberate in their lives. I can't put enough emphasis or importance on just kind of like the power of this organic momentum that you gain with other people, that for me, I really thrive off that sort of stuff. Other people, and maybe Will, like you've got the vision, you can do it yourself. That's amazing. I have so much respect for that.
I'll give you some insight into my process. I'm curious actually how this plays into your experience too. So I went to Harvard undergrad. All my friends did banking or consulting. And there are a couple of people who had a startup idea, and it was some tech idea. It was an app, or it was a website, or it was whatever. Convincing people to join you on that road was not all that hard, because that's a sexy thing, and there are these big exits, and you're getting a lot of venture money flowing in, and you can pay yourself, heck, you can pay yourself 75 grand and then in a year or two, 100 grand. And already you're at like a corporate salary anyway, right? It's not that hard to recruit, let's say, one of my buddies from Harvard to go do that. Let's juxtapose that with starting a protein bar company. Now you're going to make $0. There's not a lot of venture money flowing in. The exit multiples are dramatically lower, right? And this is all, of course, changed starting in 2022 and beyond, right? With tech multiples changing. So there's more parity now, but still at that point, I didn't actually start it solo because I wanted to. I started it solo because I literally couldn't convince another person to do it. And so that's what I'm curious about. You guys all went to Stanford. You had high opportunity costs, right? Because you could be earning XYZ dollars. Maybe that's mitigated because of the great financial crisis. So maybe in a way that was a little bit lucky because the opportunity cost just wasn't maybe necessarily there at that point. That's crazy to me. You got 4 people who are all like, damn, I could be making a lot of money over here and I'm going to start a shorts company, not a tech company, not an app. It's a shorts company. And just pulling that off is still wild to me.
Yeah, dude. I mean, so we were working for about 4 or 5 years out of college. So we were starting to make a little bit of money. And like one of us was in venture. One of us was in private equity. One of us was like moving up into the right at Gap and then Levi's. So yeah, there was a legit opportunity cost. But I'd say the cool thing that was still the case for us is that like our burn wasn't high at the time. Like we hadn't signed on for a lot of fixed costs in our lives. So it allowed us to sort of take a step back in terms of, what was coming in monthly sort of thing. So I'd say that was one takeaway. In terms of like, the whole notion of recruiting and getting people on board to do this. Yeah, totally. I mean, it's to your point, your company versus name your AI company that you could start right now. And then you've got every VC giving you like a pre-seed post at like 35 or 40 or whatever.
I did 100K on a Kickstarter post Indiegogo, had good traction, had working products, yada, yada. I was like, damn, how do I value this thing? And I called 10 people and they're like, yeah, like there's just a going rate. There's just a going rate at that time for that type of business with some traction. And it was anywhere from like 3 million to like 5 million. I was like, okay, like that's just the rate. It's not based on sales or anything. And so I came out at like a $4 million safe note cap. And that was how I raised. Juxtapose that with my 2 buddies who raised at a $10 million, like no traction, right? An idea, 2 guys at a $10 million pre-money valuation, $3 million bucks, 13 million post, same time. I was like, damn, like this is not the same, right? And making better salaries. I was making 0. So I had a unique like reference point that really hammered it home for me.
Yeah. And the obvious point to make, maybe it's not so obvious if you haven't gone through it, but you look at those 2 situations that you presented. It seems like picking the business that is the super sexy thing, being able to raise 3 on 10 or 3 on 13 or whatever, and pay yourself is way better than your situation. Now, in the short term, being able to pay yourself, maybe that's good and that you're able to jump ship earlier. But I mean, the real downside associated with raising too much, getting upside down, having to build into your valuation for your follow-up money if you need follow-up money, the pain of a down round, the continued dilution, the lack of control or whatever. There's no way that, well, maybe it was on a safe, but I would assume it was a price round, as you said. And so therefore they probably signed on with an institutional with LPs and gave up a lot of control, maybe gave up a board seat. Like all those things matter over time. And at the beginning on the surface, you're like, oh shit, they raised 3 and their post was this. I'm so jealous. But it's just sort of like, there's one thing I've learned. It's that is not a win. That is a bigger loss than anything. And you've just reduced your optionality.
Yeah.
And you've signed on for a boss. And part of the big reason we did this in the first place was not to have a boss. Not that raising money is problematic, like doing so on a safe where you control terms and probably where you raise from like a multitude of folks where no single individual has like control or sway, I think that totally makes sense to the extent they've got long-term time horizons.
Eating Glass is also sponsored by Ramp. Ramp is a corporate card and spend management software that we at IQBAR have used for 5 years now, I think. And I actually reached out to them about sponsoring, not the other way around. I love them for 3 reasons. Number 1, simplicity. Everyone on our team gets a physical and a digital card. Replacing cards, pausing cards, putting limits on cards, insanely easy. Setup takes 10 minutes. Number 2, cash back. 1.5% cash back. You don't have to deal with points. If you're messing around with points, you are wasting your time. Just get cash back. Number 3, they are better at categorizing spend. So we not only save money on the cashback side, we save time on closing our books because they're just better at classifying. They give us an incredible offer for you guys, $250 free when you sign up for Ramp today. Go to ramp.com/glass. That's ramp.com/glass. Cards are issued by Sutton Bank and Celtic Bank, members FDIC. Terms and conditions apply. Final sponsor is Gorgias, Gorgias. This is the help desk / customer service app we use at IQBAR. We've used it for years. Similar situation, I reached out to them about sponsoring, and we actually started on Zendesk and moved to Gorgias. Our customer service had forced us to, basically, and I was like, why did you force us to do that? Why is Gorgias so much better? And he said, number 1, apps and integrations are just better. We have a customer base on Shopify, Amazon. You want to be able to take phone calls. Like, all of that filters into one dashboard, and it makes his life easier. His user experience is easier. There's less clicking, less typing. Because of all the automations inherent to the Gorgias platform, he just has to do less, click less, have less tabs open. And the final thing is, it's really good for consumer brands. So returns, refunds, things that are centric to a business like mine are made really, really easy via the Gorgias platform. Go to gorgias.com. Again, that's Gorgias. Request a free trial. Mention us, Eating Glass. You will get preferential treatment, and you'll be up and running in 15 days.
How did you guys finance it though? You just pulled together savings?
We did a mix. So I think we raised, I don't know what I can say, but let's just say in the low 8 figures or something like that.
When did you start raising any real money? It sounded like maybe you got some good like market feedback, some even maybe product market fit before you even raised any real money. Like you're just out of Tahoe with your boys.
We never really maybe had one real money from a real VC, but like the first raise was really early where we were doing pre-sales to generate cash. I mean, you did, what was it, a GoFundMe? And
Not quite. I think that's more charitable. Although I guess you could call a Kickstarter half charity.
Kickstarter. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, fair. So we were doing pre-sales and as a way to generate cash to actually have money to make shorts. And that was good, but we ended up missing some deliveries. I could be mistaken on the actual story, but I think like one of the big things, like Chubbies is our 4th of July is our Christmas. So we missed 4th of July. And if you miss that,
Oh yeah.
the American flag shorts or whatever the product was, I don't remember exactly, is sort of like stupid. It's pointless. So then people would justifiably so get really mad. And I don't know if that was the exact example, but basically we missed a delivery date and we let people down, and that was so shitty. So at that point we were like, okay, we actually have to bring in a little bit of money so we can make product and actually like fulfill it when you order it and not take on this pre-sale risk. And not that pre-sales are bad and not that we never did it again, but that was it. So then I think we went into 60 of our closest friends and raised on average $10K from each of them, which ended up being a huge accounting nightmare over time, as you can probably imagine.
None of them accredited investors, or like half of them weren't.
Oh, I cannot comment on any of that,
Yeah.
but I'm sure you know how sometimes these things happen. But I think a lot were accredited, honestly, if I'm not, and maybe all, but but totally like a headache in terms of just the process, right? Overhead. But that's what you have to do sometimes. And that was awesome and huge, and it was awesome to be able to deliver solid, great returns to them. It took us a decade, but they are very grateful. And so anyways, then I think we did a small amount, maybe low single digit millions from like a wealthy individual who'd started a brand before, super helpful, super tactical, understood consumer brands, wasn't expecting necessarily like SaaS software multiples and exit timelines, and took money from some great advisors too, who were very hands-on, helpful, which I'm so grateful for. And then raised from a firm called Ridge Ventures, who I couldn't speak highly enough about. They were amazing partners. We got lucky.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer that customers can just feel your team vibe, especially when you're just like 4 people. And I think that was probably like one of your big advantages, is you being four dudes who are like out in Tahoe wearing these cool shorts. People are noticing, right? And that's like your first form of marketing, just like guerrilla marketing. And then that turns into some social media stuff of you guys inside your office. You probably did all of this stuff because you couldn't afford to do anything else, right? But it just felt so authentic and so much like I wasn't just buying shorts. Like I was like kind of like just like being in a podcast is joining a room of other people. Like I was kind of like buying these shorts. Could have been like I'm going on a trip with these cool people. I'm like one of the gang, right? It just kind of felt like that. It felt like your co-founder model actually was a big, like a seed of your success. And I'm curious, how did you go from those early days and what did it feel like? Like, did you run into any like major roadblocks to the point where you're like, oh, we actually have something here. I think we can call this product market fit. I'm willing to go talk to my friends and collect 10K from them, right? What was that point like? What roadblocks did you run into? And what was the signal that you're like, all right, now we're doing something here. We're gonna take this seriously.
Yeah, great question. To your point on the multiple founders being a helper as it relates to this vibe that we are just that it's a reason why people wanted to buy our product, I think is a great one, in that it made it a lot easier to put out this vibe of 4 really best friends embarking on this mission. Like we're just regular dudes trying to build a company. I think that story was able to happen a lot easier with multiple founders. I mean, I guess that's obvious, but that was one of the many benefits of that. So that's a good call out. In terms of like feelings of product market fit, there were a couple things. So one part of my background when I was at this consumer tech company or whatever was feeling like you make a product and people don't care. And that's like the shittiest feeling. And that's sort of like what I felt in that previous company. So, and it was all digital. So then I was like, okay, all I want is to do 2 things next. Create a physical product where I can actually like do a transaction where cash is exchanged and they then have the product and then I can see them smile or some derivation of that. I wanted that really bad as whatever I did next. And the next thing was, I don't want apathy. So that was, and I think we all had our reasons for why we wanted to do what we ended up doing. But one of the key things I think that was maybe one of the first triggers was, you mentioned Tahoe, and there were countless other examples. We all lived in San Francisco at the time where there wasn't apathy, or I guess we saw the opposite happen. People come up to us and just be like, holy shit, what are those? Both on the positive and the negative side. And where people are like, I need this. Where do I get it? Or you guys look like a bunch of idiots. Why would you ever do that? Why would you dress like that? But it was awesome that you had both sides. So that was pretty cool.
Well, you say it was pretty cool now, but when someone was like giving you shit, like, did it actually affect you and like make you, how did that affect you? No, you're psyched.
And again, maybe one of the through lines here is like single founder versus multiple. Like when you have multiple people with you and you could just look at them and you're like, I'm not crazy. But if I was by myself and someone did that to me, crazy. Like, am I the idiot? Am I the asshole? And so anyways, I think that's a benefit. And then the other thing was that just so central, it was like a very communal product. So go to the park on the weekend, drinking some beers, throwing around the football, playing Frisbee. Like, we would have done that stuff anyways. But the way that I guess we had a little bit more fun, if you will, is by wearing our shorts, which generally at the beginning were bright colors and shorter. So huge product differentiation, both on like the color and the silhouette, if you will. And it became more of a thing to see, and it became more notable when effectively the whole group was wearing it. So that was one thing. But then the so what about that was that someone comes up to you, or if you hear people like, I don't know, talking shit or whatever, you have this whole group where again, it's like, no, I'm not crazy. Persistently happened as the community grew, if you will. We were just trying to focus on making the product because we just were so bought into this idea that this needed to exist and that the status quo was so broken that not that we felt sorry for the status quo and the people who I guess were part of the status quo and the people who kind of like hid their legs or, did all of these things as like a sign of their insecurity about their legs or whatever. Like we always told ourselves these stories, but it was just very much just focused on like, who's our customer? What's the product? How do we do this thing? There are clearly people who love this. So let's just pull on that thread. And then when you had the people who didn't, that's obviously like not a clickbaity thing, but it's something that is somewhat counterintuitive. So people love to hear about that notion of people like not liking your brand as a representation of you having some level of brand salience or brand strength. But it was very much like follow the momentum, the people who love it. Who knows how big this could get, but there's some people for whom this is something that gets them really excited. So we're not crazy. Let's just keep going.
Yeah, I can imagine like 2011, it probably took some balls to be the only four dudes out there like wearing shorter shorts and everyone's like covering up their legs and trying to fit in. I'm wondering like, what point did it stop feeling like you were the only ones? And did you get some competition out there? What happened when you saw like Bird Dogs or others? Like, at what point did it kind of cross the chasm for like, hey, we're the first people doing this to wait. Now people are starting to copy us. And I don't know, when you're out there, I'm curious as well, when you're out there, like 4 or more like athletic dudes having fun, standing out with bright colors, like, do you get more attention from girls as well? Is it a lot of benefit,
I think the reality is that there are some people who are maybe more in the realm of just loving to have a good time, not really taking themselves super seriously. And there's a level of carefree or freedom associated with that and those sorts of people. And I think it's generally quite just objectively attractive, not necessarily just to the opposite sex, but to anyone. I think it's just objectively something that's somewhat aspirational. So why do I bring that up? A couple reasons. One, while shorter shorts in general were less popular, you think about college or even post-college when you haven't really like moved in with your significant other or started your family, like you're living with your buddies and your friends and there's still a sort of like a strong, tight social component to your life. You're doing theme parties, you're dressing funny sometimes, right? Mm-hmm. And so you'd go to Goodwill, you'd go to Savers or whatever, you'd get some like vintage stuff. And sometimes, shorter retro shorts were what you got. So I know that was how I was. And I know the other co-founders as well. And a bunch of our friends were like that. Right. And so there was something there where it was just like, I love these products. I love these shorter shorts. They're super cool. Can't get them in stores. It'd be awesome if something like this existed. And it just feels better. It's more fun. And you could somehow make the connection between being confident wearing these shorter shorts and confidence, and therefore the opposite being lack of confidence. And those sorts of themes are somewhat universal, right? No one wants to be unconfident, and no one wants to be doing things that can be labeled as having lack of confidence. So I think some of those things were kind of like through lines in a light, friendly way that kind of fueled our positioning, our marketing. And so anyways, that's, I think, where maybe it started to come from at the beginning. And then as you start to, I think second part of your question was like copycats, competitors, things like that. Like, I guess maybe like the PR answer is we're just so focused on our customer, like competitor aware, customer obsessed, like Bezos likes to say. But we're competitive folks, and like we want to win. And so I think there's that component too, where it's like, oh, they're doing it all wrong. They're this and that and this that I think is largely unproductive. And so to say that we were completely immune to that sort of stuff would be lying. But I do think we were just trying to be like, to your earlier point, like when people say they hate you, it strengthens the vibe and the connection between the people who do. Part of it was like, oh my gosh, we don't want to be that. So let's refocus on who we are, and let's make sure, at least from our messaging and from our product perspective, like let's sharpen. And so I think all those sorts of things are net benefit. And the other piece is just like, the reality is that more copycats brings more awareness to your category. And so it's like a rising tide that lifts all boats, where they're spending ad dollars to push short shorts. And so that makes us more of a thing that is obvious. So it's like, thanks, appreciate you spending dollars on my behalf, which is the reality of the way that this stuff actually kind of unfolds. And then you just have to deliver. Like, you just got to, okay, so then make great product, make great content. And to the extent you're doing that, they're basically, fueling your P&L. So that's a couple thoughts on, like competition. And then I think maybe the final part of the question was just around like this making you more attracted to, potential romantic interests. And I have no idea, but I think so. I mean, it's definitely a filter, right?
You should have tracked pre and post success.
Yeah,
cargo shorts
so
and then Chubbies.
I started dating my now wife right when I was about to quit my job or thinking about it, because we were doing Chubbies nights and weekends, and start doing it. And so I was, as I was mentioning earlier, we were starting to make a little bit of money. So I was starting to make a little bit of money. I was like, I'm a cool technology professional to my wife. And she was at Meta at the time, still there, amazingly. And like, she's a total badass. But so there was that component where it's just like, I'm in theory taking a huge step back in the way I'm coming across as like a cool, financially providery type person in this potential relationship. Cause I was living in San Francisco with like 5 people. To cut costs even further from low cost, I moved out of my bedroom and into the bedroom of Tom, one of my co-founders, and didn't even have a bed. I was sleeping on a beanbag. And so anyways, I had a super successful start. I can't believe she ended up staying with me and then marrying me. But that was sort of like my somewhat version of a pre-post. I think I just got lucky more than anything. But for the other co-founders, and I think for customers who are our friends, I think it was a net positive for sure. I think it brought out a little bit more of that fun and levity that I think is generally a fun and attractive.
It was probably polarizing, just like we've talked about, right? It probably put off a certain percentage of the opposite sex and vice versa, right?
Yeah. You self-select and the folks who are a fit. So I think it also hopefully saved a bunch of collective time in helping folks, find their ideal match, which again, we're just providing services for the community is basically what I'm trying to say.
Well, okay. So I had a bunch of thoughts as you were talking on like if I'm you, just from an armchair third party analysis standpoint, to me, I'm like looking at your business as you at that point in time, and there's like headwinds and tailwinds. So like on the tailwind side, my sense is a business like this has a pretty high virality coefficient, meaning just like, if you have like a 0.1, then if you have 100 customers, you'll get 10 new customers out of that 100 because 10 people will get recommended the product out of that cohort. And of course, like the holy grail is over a 1, right? And then every customer more than replaces themselves, and you get virality, you get exponential growth, right? I'm always so jealous of companies with really, really high virality coefficients, because like when you're wearing loud shorts in the park, right, that's more visible than, let's say you're buying our products and we're in your pantry. Someone would have to go into your home, look in your pantry. Maybe you at the gym, you recommend a new protein bar or whatever. But it seems like you're more conducive to a high virality coefficient. So I'm curious if that's the case. But then also, my sense is community. It's like, in looking and listening to past interviews, like community kept coming up. It makes sense, right? Like the founder cohort is like 4 guys. You're your own mini community. You said often we're friends with our customers, which I think is cool too, right? Like that's like a moat, right? In and of itself, a community is a moat, especially one that is sitting on in a polarized space. So those are like the tailwinds that were running through my mind. The headwinds were, okay, shorter shorts, right? Like, can't anyone do that? A la bird dogs, right? Or a la whatever. And I think you made a great point, which I've gone through that whole psychological cycle of, oh, I have a copycat competitor. I need to destroy them. They're going to take market share. And I had the same realization you did. Actually, not really. Like our enemy is Nestle or General Mills, not, this other startup. They're helping us grow our category. And like, that's a net benefit. So I don't actually think that is a legitimate headwind, I guess, other than the extent of like on the exit side, right? So some acquirers like, okay, what's your, IP or differentiation, and why can't someone knock you off? And then you have to answer to that person. But like outside of that, the competitive thing is a non-thing. But the only other thing would be just like style, right? Like I'm not in a fashion business, but the same thing is kind of true on the nutrition side, right? So if like keto would be a good example. So we came out with ultra low carb products, and there was just an absolute craze. You could put the word keto on cardboard and sell 10,000 of them on Amazon and like call it 2018, 2019, 2020. And then keto plateaued and is now starting to die, right? And the same thing, that dynamic is kind of true too, to a degree,
for sure,
in fashion. And so were you just thinking through like, okay, we can be knocked off. And then also like there's fashion. And then also, I guess, compounding with that for you guys is seasonality, right? So it's like a triple whammy there. How did you think about those like headwinds and tailwinds in your scale up process?
So I'll just add to your list of headwinds. So, and then can talk more about that. So headwinds, so many headwinds. You mentioned seasonality. Yes, absolutely. Let's just talk product category in general. First of all, men's. You should never choose to do men's versus women's. Men do not buy clothes. The size of the men's apparel TAM is minuscule compared to women. The size of TAM of men's apparel purchased by men, astronomically smaller. Bottoms versus tops, much, much smaller. Shorts versus pants within bottoms, much, much smaller. Short shorts within shorts, much, much smaller, effectively non-existent. So massive headwind was just picking this category. Not that it was stupid, but if I were to do it over again, probably wouldn't do that. We tried to expand into women's, and I can't speak about what's going on now. Maybe it's going really well, but for a long time, couldn't really do it. Like it was maybe like a nice to have, maybe you'd do like matching outfits or something like that. And then we tried to expand beyond shorts And again, I think more progress now. I don't know. But back in the day, super hard. We hadn't earned the right in people's minds because we'd just been hammering short shorts to do anything else. So just huge headwinds. And I think another headwind was just how we positioned the company so much around this hero product rather than, I think, a broader maybe lifestyle or, so anyways, I think there was maybe a headwind there. So a variety of headwinds. I think another headwind was at the beginning, we chose to manufacture in the United States, in San Francisco, where labor cost may be the highest in the world. And this is not a premium product. This is not a Louis Vuitton purse. This is just like a pair of cotton tiny shorts. So when you think about gross margins matter and contribution margin matters, all this stuff really matters. We thought that a central tenet of the reason why people bought from us was because they were made in America. So we were so freaked out about the potential of transitioning to international production.
I guess no one cared.
We ultimately did it. What was
no
that?
one care?
We got a lot of great advice from our board in terms of how to approach it, where obviously you have limited information and make your best guess with all the data you have in terms of like how many customers you might lose, put a plan around it, put your communication plan in place. Don't expect it's going to be zero, but then make an objective determination of whether or not the pros and the cons, what then makes sense. And the expansion in margin was just so pronounced that then allowed us to do so many things that were beneficial to the customer that it was obvious, even if we lost a pretty meaningful amount of customers. But still, it freaks you the hell out. Like, it's just so crazy. You're like, because you just don't really know. We didn't do a ton of surveying at the time. It was pretty heavy part of our marketing. But yeah, to your point, it ended up being very light. We were super honest. We were just like, this is the business. This is the costs. This is like effectively our P&L, not totally, but like this is the economics. And we are aligned in wanting to make more kick-ass product for you, make awesome content that you like, be able to provide customer service in the United States, do all of these things that they're benefiting from. So it was like, they're like, oh, okay. I used to love that you're made in the US, but I get it. And it was actually one of those counterintuitive things where people are like, oh, okay. I feel like you're cluing me in on information that I ordinarily wouldn't get from a company. And therefore that's actually going to increase my love for you because they're like leveling with me.
Yeah.
And they're treating me like an adult and they're not just being like, giving you some bullshit answer.
Not sweeping it under the rug.
just
You get in trouble
yeah,
when
right.
you sweep it under the rug, in my experience.
Yeah, and ignore it and think that a person is too dumb to understand the real answer. And so anyways, I think I'm so grateful for that advice because that was one of the most massive beneficial changes that we made. And for shorts at the time, one of the surprising things, at least for me, and I was totally ignorant on making clothes, et cetera, was that because I always had this assumption that made in the USA is objectively the best. America's the best. There's no better. It's going to be we're only going to go down in quality if we go international. And that was actually not the case. At least in our product category at that time. So people are probably going to be like, oh, you're an idiot. You're wrong. But in this very particular situation, you find that in some situations, like there are machines that help make this particular, whether it be, I don't know, like the certain button or the certain seam or whatever that just doesn't exist in the United States because there's been such massive divestiture in manufacturing, especially on the apparel side in the US. So you're just like, oh my gosh, this stuff is blowing my mind. We're like the Harvard grads of name your country go into manufacturing apparel, whereas not really the case in the United States. So all of these kind of like counterintuitive things were just like, we're actually going to step up in quality. while decreasing cost. So we'll be making better product. Because we had a lot of issues with like splitting at the middle seams where people would squat, or because they were generally wearing like the smaller end of the sizing and they were generally more athletic individuals. So, they go to the bar and they'd do a dance move or whatever, or they would do a workout and they would squat and they would just rip their shorts. And that would happen pretty frequently at the beginning. Anyways, that was like, there were product quality issues, I'm trying to say. And it was just like a counterintuitive thing associated with that transition. But yeah, it was just one of those things where at the time it seemed like a bet the company move. Like it seemed like, oh my God, this could put us out of business. And it ended up being one of the best decisions, we ever made.
Yeah, I found in our early stages, manufacturing in the US was super important because we iterated on the product so fast. And it was just like,
Yes, 100%.
Right. And that was super important.
And we always held on to that.
Yeah.
So there was always like quick response, super small runs, test things out. And maybe I think got a little bit of that in Mexico as well, but like super close where you could do that quick feedback stuff because you got to try things out, right? You can't make, I don't know what the number is, but 10,000 unit buys for every idea you have, right? So yeah, you're totally right. That was essential, especially at the beginning, because you just got to iterate so quickly. And you were doing mostly small runs. So that was the other piece where it was just like, we couldn't go to the ballers and name your country and say, hey, can you do a 300 unit run across all sizes? They'd be like, no, get out of my face. So there are some realities there as well.
What else did you find as your company grew? Did you struggle to maintain as a company culture that was core to you as a smaller team?
Yeah, it becomes harder over time because you've tried a lot of stuff in the past, and whether or not the way you tried that thing in the past was evaluated correctly, you then add so many of those trials to the L bucket, like in wins and losses, to where when someone says, let's just try it, you're like, no, we tried it, didn't work. So much of that like adds up and accumulates over time that it becomes a cancer in an organization. So a lot of the work we had to do, second that would happen, just like squash it immediately and very much just be like, I trust you, I hired you, or we are co-founders or whatever, that you have the best intent and that you are a smart, thoughtful individual. If you think this is an idea that has merit, let's try it. Let's just make sure we have a way to evaluate it, and let's do so like as objectively as possible so that we could just move faster. Right. Whereas, and not that we were perfect at all, but we would just spend so much time debating stuff that just shouldn't have been debated. And it just slowed us down from getting closer to doing the thing that would benefit our customer more. So I think that's one of the things, like culture of experimentation, squashing this whole like, oh, we tried it, didn't work. Or squashing the, let's just debate about something that is completely subjective rather than let's just put it in our test plan, try it, structure the test. Let's understand very objectively what success means and what failure means. And let's just go. So that because you can get really slow. I think that's when politics.
It almost seems like you took the opposite arc of like a standard startup where the more mature you get, the slower you get. It sounds like the more mature you got, the faster you got almost. You know what I'm saying? Like that's like the classic death knell of a big company is you get slower, you iterate less fast, innovator's dilemma, blah, blah, blah. And is that accurate to say you basically went in the opposite direction and you were able to create a culture even as you got bigger such that you would increase speed?
Yes and no. Yes, in that you see how those mistakes pop up and you're like, we got to address that. So I think it was whether or not we were net faster, I think we were at least maintaining, even though we felt like we were doing things that helped us move faster, but there was also just increased friction. That makes sense. But I would like to think that yes, that was the case. But what I should also acknowledge is one of the things that happens in an organization is the curse of money, the curse of success. So kind of hearkening to like our earlier conversation of like these AI companies that can just raise infinite dollars. Impossible to say that you do not get a little sloppy when you have a ton of money in the bank, right? I mean, human nature, even if you're the most disciplined, scrappy person, every incremental dollar that's in the bank, you're incrementally less scrappy, disciplined, money saving. So at the beginning, we just did a lot of stuff that was much more, I would say, creative and got us from like an arbitrage perspective, like quality reach to dollars spent, that just started to compress.
Yep.
And that was something that I look back on, not with regret, but with wonder, because when you start to have a little bit of money and you also tie it to meta advertising, this perception, right, that you can like put $1 in and get whatever, 10 out tomorrow is so attractive, right? But the reality of it is that it's like such a box. And then you start allocating 100% of your thought to that box. And there's just such a broader world from the perspective of how to get buzz, get the word out, change people's minds at scale outside of just this meta DR world. That was one of like our overarching evolutions as a business, not necessarily massively getting off of meta, but getting off of like total bottom funnel direct response focus, which can happen with a lot of these modern consumer brands. So I think one of the things that I take responsibility allowed to happen was because I felt like I'm so data driven and smart, I can measure all of this stuff that we should measure all these things in this way. And I realized that I was like a lemming from the perspective of just like doing what Meta told me to do. And rather than like thinking independently, like, what is the broadest, most interesting thing that we can possibly do? And not that we just didn't do any of that stuff, but I tend to believe that every human in the organization has a certain number of like thought minutes per day. And that's like a fixed resource. And it's very important where you allocate those thought minutes. And so every time you allocate it to something that's lower leverage, right? Huge opportunity cost. So I think that was a learning too, that was maybe a trend in the wrong direction, at least at the beginning, that we had to work really hard to reverse over time. But yeah, there are all these really interesting things that you run into as you're sort of like adding people to the team, but broadly
adding people and channels, right? We had a similar
and channels. Yeah.
We had a similar arc that you had where at each new channel, you might as well be starting a new company. Like our brick and mortar business might as well be a different company just in the way it functions relative to D2C or even Amazon, right? There's category review. It happens once a year. You have to make
totally
a
different
PowerPoint
timeline.
deck. Yeah, different
Totally
timeline,
different
different
product development, totally different fulfillment. Yeah.
And it's just slower. It just is like way slower, like 1,000x slower on the downside. Yeah. But it's super net profitable if you can do it right. Whereas like, D2C often is not. So, but it's just like so fundamentally different in every way. But on the speed thing, it's like, you can't move faster because you're not the decision maker in certain channels.
Okay. We're pretty good at Meta. Let's just go do Twitter. We're pretty good at whatever. We're going to be just as good and just as efficient with this new marketing channel, because we're smart. I think in general, we found that at least for us wasn't super wise. It was kind of shiny objecty. But from the perspective of sales channels, I mean, I think that was one of the things that we learned ended up being just hugely beneficial. I mean, to the extent, the biggest learning was just like, our brand exists in people's minds and they're busy. And why would we insert unnecessary friction on getting them to buy from us by having to enter chubbies.com in their browser when they're just trying to like pay their bills and pick up their kids from school or do whatever? It's like, who do I think I am because I want to own the transaction, or I need to get the email address so I can drive LTV. It's just like, Why spend 100% of your marketing dollars on 5% of the retail pie? That was like a big learning for us. Not that it's, and then you're like, okay, it's worth it to take on this brand new P&L, this brand new business, because you could just be where people already are.
And it's synergistic with your existing, right? Like there's absolutely that flywheel. Like we experience that with Costco
Yeah.
or whatever. People find us in Costco and then buy us on Amazon, and vice versa. And also being on a shelf is a Facebook ad. It's just free.
Yes. 100%. 100%. Your packaging, the whole thing. Yeah. It is a Facebook ad. It is name your thing. And I think that's a very underappreciated component of showing up in the physical realm for sure. Yeah. Couldn't agree with you more on that.
I found in-store so hard, man, when we just did the lion's share of our revenue on Amazon, and it was just so relatively easy. And then you move over to like a company like Staples, for example, which was probably the hardest of all of ours. They have somebody who like sits there and looks at your packages, and like their job is to find fines, to fine you. And they want to like, find the vendor, and it felt like the calories in for the revenue out for me became really hard for some of the in-store channels. And maybe that's also because our product was like an old fashioned thing with a new twist, a new invention to it. So having the web page and the video really seemed to be pretty essential for us. Right? But I never really figured out like how to make, Rocketbook does a lot of in-store stuff, but how to make it as profitable, as let's say Amazon was for us.
That's interesting. Product matters, right? And the use case matters. Yeah, for sure. That's really interesting.
As you got bigger, right? I also found it really difficult as we moved upwards, 10, 30, $50 million in revenue, to keep the scrappiness and the creativity, right? Because there's a few things. One is you're like taking a meeting in the morning about should we install an ERP system, and that takes some of the creativity calories out of the founder, right? But then there's also, is this idea actually going to move the needle? And when you get bigger and bigger, the ideas that can move the needle start to shrink, right? And we even, at one point we're like, we're going to spend $1 million on this campaign to hire, Brian and Angela from The Office, and we're going to spend another, it was pretty creative and it was great, but we spent a lot of money on it, and it was kind of like the outcome was a little bit like Snoop Dogg and Solo Stove, right? It got a lot of awareness, but we couldn't measure the payoff easily. But we started taking some bolder risks, things like this that actually weren't as creative, weren't as scrappy, but I struggled with that. Like, how do you maintain creativity and scrappiness as you get bigger and bigger? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, not only is it about having to move a needle off of a larger and larger base, there's so much more to lose, right? So when you have all these people's salaries, feeding like these things, more investors, a board, maybe you're starting to have acquisition conversations, or you're at least like starting relationships with potential acquirers, potential future investors, so much more to lose in theory, right? Where there's this cognitive load that I think is ultimately quite unnecessary when you're building a consumer brand, because none of that helps you do the thing that helps you differentiate so that you can actually sell more of your stuff. But it's a rational response to this notion of having more to lose. So there's that. I mean, to the extent you can deal with that and put that in its place, and then recenter on what matters, what is actually going to contribute value to this asset that I intend to build. I think we did well to realize that product and brand has to differentiate, has to be notable, be bold, be memorable. Like, one of my favorite quotes is, the brand that gets remembered is the brand that gets bought, right? The brand that gets remembered is the brand that gets bought. So that never changes, because the way the human mind works has not changed, right? in a long time, even though like marketing channels have changed. So that I think was one of the things that we try to hold on to. The other piece, to our earlier point on having multiple founders, you're talking about this ERP meeting, completely soul sucking. If anyone's gone through a NetSuite implementation or any kind of an ERP implementation, maybe the most soul sucking thing on planet Earth. But luckily, having multiple co-founders, Kyle could handle all of that. And Kyle and Dave could handle all of that. And Tom and I could be completely shielded from that soul suckingness and try to focus on whatever you want to call it, the fun stuff of just trying to, make people laugh, make people feel a certain way. So I think that's another benefit of co-founders, to the extent that you could get them that can handle that sort of stuff. But then people, we were just so blessed that awesome people wanted to join. We knew awesome people who then knew awesome people. And I think they just felt it was like a compelling opportunity, even though they had a lot of optionality. And to do this thing, to get their work out there, because we committed to getting their stuff out there, which is ultimately, I think, what they want. They wanted those reps. They wanted to build their resume. They want to do these things. So like we had like moonlighting stand-up comics, just like amazing people who are amazing content creators who are a million times more creative than I am, just creating awesome stuff. I think that was a huge area of overinvestment, potentially to the point of irrationality or irresponsibility, but a chosen area of massive overinvestment to in-house this capability because we just thought it was core and we didn't want to outsource core. And that, I think, to your point, to get back to your point and answer it directly, mitigated, I think, the creative degradation that tends to happen when you grow, when you lose that initial spark. That happens for a variety of reasons. So those are some of the things that I learned. Caveats galore, like not perfect. It affected us for sure, blah, blah, blah. But I think those are the things maybe that worked for us.
What, on the exit side, I think this is something everyone loves talking about for obvious reasons, but I'm actually personally for my brand and the somewhat near future thinking about this and strategizing around this and all that. But just, can you walk us through like everything with regard to the exit, right? Like, was there a period for founders? Was there a period where you were like, all right, guys, like we're ready to sell. Here's why. Did two people say were two people ready to get out and two weren't? Like, how did you set some watermark where once you hit that, you're like, all right, we're gonna start looking. And then just like on the inbound side, was Solo Brands, did they approach you? Did you hire a banker? Did you run a competitive process? And then just through all of it, I think this is a huge black box for people. Like, what actually is it like? Like, what are the things like people would be surprised about that type of process? And like, what went wrong? What do you wish you did differently? Like, just talk about the exit process in general.
Sure. So I think one of the things to pass along, just from like not all sunshine and rainbows, obviously, I think that goes without saying, but it's like either like we tried and failed at that part of things multiple times. And so maybe it was like roughly third time's the charm sort of situation, but at multiple times leading up to that. Now, granted, the big arc of the story was that a lot of the stuff, and I can only speak for myself and then maybe by extension slightly the marketing work, a lot of the changes that we made and how they impacted the P&L made the business much more attractive to a potential acquirer that weren't really manifesting in the P&L. First number of times we either tried to get some sort of private equity involvement, whether it be in a minority or majority capacity, or fully, exit and try to get liquid.
Is that when you talk about like contribution margin and getting off of the teeth of Meta and ROAS and things like that? Is that the big thing that you changed?
Yeah, I mean all that stuff where yes, I mean, more contribution dollars, holding constant contribution margin or increasing it like that just, to the extent your fixed costs stay fixed, that just drops more dollars to the bottom line. And therefore you go from a business that is losing cash to generating cash. And that's attractive. I mean, there was a world where exit multiples were off of top line, but that world changed for at least apparel brands when there were massive write-downs on huge acquisitions. I think like Trunk Club and Bonobos, for instance, were two examples where they were acquired at big numbers. And then I think Nordstrom and Walmart wrote down the acquisition to the value of those businesses massively. And so then it was like, okay, the exit environment for this type of business is, wow, my equity is worth like a third as much as it was yesterday. So that's really exciting. Let me go to my wife and tell her that. And so that stuff happens, and that's super shitty. But all these things change, and they can change relatively quickly. All you can control is what you control. So yes, we were a business that was relatively quickly growing top line at a slower and slower percentage, right, off of a bigger and bigger base, but losing money every year. And then generally over a long period of time, making some of these changes, generating more contribution dollars. Like a lot of that manifested in like an ever increasing percentage of total new customer acquisition coming through owned and organic traffic sources, right? So what were you then doing to drive those things? That can be a separate conversation, but yes, that was predominantly what I'm talking about. So then the acquisition environment at the time was off of an EBITDA multiple, right? And I think that's probably what most businesses are getting valued off of today. Not all, of course. So there was that. So point one, failed multiple times at trying to either get acquired or get some liquidity, right? Because we weren't really
failed meaning what? You approached
started processes,
strategics, or you started
engaged
processes?
bankers, started trying to run a process ourselves, trying to engage a bank to help, starting conversations with potential acquirers, getting close to either proposed terms or term sheets, that sort of thing. Yeah. Kicking off the process to where when it doesn't work out for a founder, it's a pretty big morale hit. You're just like, shh. Especially when you're like the arc of any business, right? Is like, oh, this is fun. Oh, this is hard. I'm not growing 200% a year anymore. Let's figure it out, right? We got to figure this thing out to see what the next inflection point could be. And during this, like when you're getting to the end of this hard, let's call it like deserty period, you get burnt out. I mean, it's not easy. I can't even imagine what it's like as a solo founder, but with 4, you still had people to pick you up, but it's just like, shit, when is this going to be something that I can look back on and be like, it was worth it? So it's
my guess, tell me if I'm wrong here. When you started, you took 10 years, right? When it started, you're like, this could be a 5-year deal here. Like, this could be a 3-year deal if we absolutely crush. Like once you hit that inflection of product market fit, you're like, all right. Like, and then of course it isn't, and it takes 3 times longer. So now you're on year 7 and you're like,
yeah,
let's recalibrate here.
Totally. So yeah, it's not just like every day you're in it, just like I'm crushing it. Focus on the future and correct inputs. No, it's just like, God, this company got acquired. Shit, what's wrong with me? This company got acquired. What am I not doing right? Oh, why did I choose this category? They're a socks company or whatever, right? Why am I? So it's like, all these things just suck. So then, granted, we were acquired in 2021, right? So just like everything was up and to the right in 2021. Cost of money was 0. So, right, asset values massively inflated. So I think timing, I guess, is one thing that is totally, people probably acknowledge it, like macro timing, but it is huge, right? I mean, the swings in equity value for these private companies with limited history is massive, right? So you just never want to be in a position, where you have to sell, obviously, but the swing between selling like right now versus selling, call it 2021 or what I think maybe in 25 or 26, is going to be pretty big, even with the same exact P&L, right? So that was huge. And I think the failures of the past helped inform how to better run a process, right? I mean, all about continuing momentum when you get engaged with someone, all about, all of these things, like making sure there's a strong continued growth story that's believable and that you've already got proof points on, and resilience. Like for us, that was huge, right? Because the obvious questions that is like the fashion risk, to your earlier point, the differentiation piece, like no technology here. They're cotton shorts. So then it's brand. And so then it's like, how do you value brand? Well, that's like what I talk about all the time on LinkedIn. It's just like, what do you have if you turn off your direct response and your discounts? What then do you have? Because in theory, an acquirer may want to just like dial back marketing spend so they can turn up the profits. But if you can't dial back marketing spend, there are no profits. That's not an asset worth acquiring. So all of these sorts of things. But yeah, I mean, process wise, found a great bank, and they did their process. They're total pros, and recommend them to anyone. So just feel free to reach out. And they ran a process, and they did a great job at finding the right fit, because it's very much about fit. And this is all obvious stuff, but like, why are they going to value you more than that other potential acquirer will? And so therefore, okay, price should commensurately match, and all of that stuff. I mean, I was amazed at how well they ran a process, like total pros, totally, I think, a beneficial, worthwhile use of money, because it's not free to have someone help you get acquired. But because you could run this yourself, you could be like, I know what I'm doing. I know how to sell my business. But didn't work for us.
Did they get you multiple offers? Did you have options to choose between?
Yes. And yes, I'd say, long story short, yes. Hard to know, again, how much of it is timing, how much of it is like fundamental objective asset value as to why we were able to get like multiple strong offers versus previous times kind of went down the road where maybe, try to cajole one person to put something forth. So that's hard to do, but yes, I'd say, long story short, yes. So super fortunate. I mean, all the credit to the team and to the people who helped us and the other co-founders. Like, I really had nothing to do with this, but yeah, that's kind of how it went.
How you doing on timing? You have 5 minutes for a lightning round?
Yep.
All right. So there's a Peter Thiel question that I love, which is, what important truth do very few people agree with you on? So basically, what is your like greatest counterintuitive belief?
Well, when starting Chubbies, it was that shorts can be a massive business. And now it's that you can, and again, it's just like in my little Mitch world, but that you can quantifiably measure the financial impact of investing in your brand.
Right on. All right, next one is, what are commonly cited platitudes about what it takes to create a startup to win that are just plain wrong?
Not to be like super smart sounding person, but I quibble with the premise to a certain extent, because what I've learned is that there's no right or wrong. I guess the only thing, and no one really says it, is like, quit when things get hard. But I don't know. That's kind of like the only thing that I've learned is like the thing that works is just like, or that seems to be universal, is just like, when things get hard, people just keep going. And so I don't know. I mean, but I've been humbled to see a million versions of how to find success that I would have thought were totally wrong and stupid, that I was just proven wrong about countless times. So I guess maybe my answer would be, I really have no idea.
All right, I got another. There's this VC called Mike Maples Jr. that has some great quotes.
Blackgate?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, but he has this term he uses. I don't know if he invented it or not, but it's called an earned secret. And I just fell in love with that idea. And so like the Airbnb founders, their earned secret was they like, actually did it themselves. They slept on air mattresses and learned what the experience was like and talked to all these potential hosts and took photos of the initial things listed, apartments listed on Airbnb. They earned that secret of like, ooh, I like unlock something that just no one else knows. And I'm going to leverage that earned secret to build an entire business. What is your earned secret?
The other thing I would add about that story is that they also earned the ability to experiment and try that stuff by doing scrappy things to make money in the short term. Like the cereal box story.
Yeah.
Right?
Barry O's.
Like who would go out and sell cereal boxes to make money when you think you're some like cool tech founder, right? They humbled themselves to make money so that they had a lifeline. So anyways, side note, the earned secret. It's a good question. Pass. I don't have a useful answer.
What's your biggest regret over that 10-year period? And then would you do it again? Like there's a great Jensen Huang interview recently, the NVIDIA founder, right? And he was like, no, absolutely not. I would not do it over again.
So the thing I would say about that interview, and I didn't see the whole thing, but 2 seconds before, 2 seconds after, he's like, I get up every day. I'm adding so much value to this business. He wears his motorcycle jackets. He talks in front of thousands of people. Like, yeah, it was probably hard and stressful, but a lot of people do hard and stressful things, and you're worth hundreds of billions of dollars or however much you're worth. And you get to do what you love and like create amazing I just don't buy it. I don't buy it. But again, I didn't listen to the whole episode and whatever, but my biggest takeaway on that front is, yeah, I would do it again. The reality is the acquisition and then the being done is not awesome. It is totally not awesome. Sure, a little bit of liquidity is cool, but it's actually like not as cool as you think it is. But more than anything, you then miss all of the bullshit you would deal with on a day-to-day basis, working, being in it, even when you're burnt out. You miss the burnout because then you're just like, there's a feeling of significance that people completely, myself included, take for granted, that you're working on something that people love and you're showing up every day and contributing impacts this thing that impacts a lot of people. And that from like a self-actualization perspective and like meaning of life perspective is just like so huge. So I think broadly what I would say is like acquisition, cool, whatever, but I miss it. And I wish I was still doing it. Now you need to have this kind of experience to then develop the appreciation for being in it. So yes, absolutely. I would do it again because that is the joy of life, is working on something that you think is important with people you love. There's nothing better than that. So yes.
So you would do it again, but knowing what you know now, you wouldn't sell it.
We had to sell it because we took on money from other people. So we didn't have the option to not sell it. So by taking on money from other people who didn't want dividends or whatever, who needed VC type exits because they have LPs, we limited our optionality. So either my recommendation, don't take money, or B, position yourself in such a way where your investors will take dividends so that you can have the option of cash flowing the thing. Because in theory, once you own an asset that's generating many, many millions of dollars in profit every year, like I was listening to the founder's podcast on the Red Bull founder, and was taking dividends of like 500 to 800 million a year. We're just like, fine, great. So it's like the way these things can compound over time, you're like, I would never sell something like this. A, I love it. B, I'm not going to give my baby to someone else. I don't want to answer to anyone else. And I could have sold my business for a fraction of what I'm now getting every single year in dividend. It's just kind of like, I'm thinking about this differently now.
Right on. Hey, I'm curious, how do you define success now as compared to, before you started Chubbies?
I'll be a little bit trite, but like being a badass husband and dad, super important. from the professional perspective, well, super important to me, and I would assume to everyone. But I think that's a given, right? From the professional perspective, I think what success means is just that, like working on something you think is very important with people you love and giving 1000% to it, and not half-assing any of that stuff. Like work-life balance, I don't know. I think you can if you just reduce your Netflix time, there's so much shit you can get done that people just, I think, don't want to come to terms with. So I think you can if you pick your priorities carefully and commit to them and just like, don't dick around, there's a lot of stuff you can do. And I think so much of my definition of success now is focused on like inputs rather than outputs. Again, finding something you deeply care about, working your ass off, and ideally with people you love, that's success. And you can do that forever, right? Like that's the whole thing about infinite games, is that, I mean, you can't take that from me. You can't, I never want to stop that. And that's like the best thing in life. And you can control that. Can't control these like binary potential financial outcomes, finite games, whatever. So that's what I view as success.
Love it.
All right. Last one, just what are you doing now? Like what excites you now? What are you working on now? What do you want to plug that you're doing now? I know I read your stuff at Bodacious Brands, your newsletter, but I know you're doing stuff on LinkedIn. I think you have a new co in the works. Like what's next?
Yeah. In the early stages of starting a new company, effectively informed by all the mistakes we made at Chubbies, particularly around like investing in growth, brand building, et cetera. Which I think, to maybe one of your earlier questions about Maples, like the I think it was like earned secret, earned truth.
Earned
But
secret.
all of the mistakes we made, like overinvestment, over-reliance on direct response, the problems with that, how to kind of figure out how to measurably invest in building this like resilient base of organic revenue, which you can call brand. I think that's like our earned secret that we had to earn through a lot of like pain and suffering and sadness, making all these mistakes, wasting a lot of money. And that's like the earned secret that I think is the thing that's informing what we're doing now. But outside of that, like today, it's all about like trying to write to be helpful to the community of consumer brand builders out there. So writing on LinkedIn, just Preston Rutherford. There's a shorts emoji in between my first and last name. If you like my stuff, great. That's awesome. If you don't, let me know. I'll try to improve.
Preston, this is awesome, man. Great conversation. Awesome that we met on LinkedIn, and yeah, everyone should go follow Preston. He's a great follow.
And check out Bodacious Brands. I was jamming on your stuff for a couple hours today, and it's awesome. Really enjoyed it.
Sweet. Yeah. It's a newsletter. It's a blog, whatever. I think it's bodaciousbrands.beehive.com. I think we didn't pay for a fancy URL or anything like that, but I think Beehive has 2 eyes. But yeah, if you want to check it out, read it, subscribe, try to write helpful things on brand building, and update the posts whenever we have something useful to share. Hopefully it's useful. So yeah, check that out too.
Right on.
Bodacious.
Thanks for the time.
Thanks, Preston.
Thanks, guys. A lot of fun.
All right, that's a wrap. Thanks for listening, and thank you to our sponsors, IQBAR. Go to Amazon.com, search for IQBAR, buy one, wait for it to arrive, leave a review. Please leave a review. Reviews are massive. Our second sponsor is Ramp. Go to ramp.com/glass. They give you $250 for free when you sign up. It's the best credit card / spend management software there is. Use it for years. Love it. Our third sponsor is Gorgias, GORGIAS.com. It's the best help desk software there is. We use it too. Also love it. Request a demo and mention eating glass. They will give you preferential treatment. They'll treat you well. If you like the podcast in general, subscribe, review it, tell a couple friends, tell your mom, and tune in a couple weeks. Talk to you then.